Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Thank you very much for signing up and showing interest in this topic. The topic today is where to start with cookies, and the focus is for Swedish companies. A lot has happened since the legislation of GDPR, which is one of the reasons why we're here today, has been enforced in 2018. A lot of different topics, a lot of different departments in a company are now involved in websites and cookies, and I would like to go through where do you even start? What's important? What's still important in 2021 going into 2022? Much of the presentation will be quotes from the Swedish authorities. I have not translated these in text, but I will translate them verbally, and that is done so we don't lose any context. Let's get into it. The agenda for today's meeting will be an outline of the Swedish guidelines. So what is important for a Swedish company that wants to be compliant in regards to collecting data and processing data via cookies on their website. Then we will look at kind of map that out and look at some steps, what is required to become cookie compliant. I'll connect that to, of course, what does cookie information do? And what we do is we automate some of these processes that is required for you to be compliant. So I'll connect that to what's the best practices, how can processes be automated. I will, and as it was mentioned in the chat, something about analytics. I'll talk a little bit about analytics because one of the reasons, again, why we're here today is because of a legislation that was put into effect in all of Europe in 2018. So where are companies today? So I'll talk a little bit about how to perform compliant analytics. It won't be covering the complete topic of analytics. It will be a way to do it in a compliant way. Then I'll connect. So in 2021, going forward, how do you make sure that the initiatives that you do in your company that has to do with cookies, that has to do with your website, how do you ensure that you don't have to revisit this cookie compliance thing every time you want to do something new on your website? So I'll connect a bit of context to how companies, at least the ones we consult, how they work with continuing to be compliant with cookies. And then again, we'll end with questions that Vitalina will moderate through the Q&A tab in Zoom. All right. So who are we saying this? Who am I? My name is Mark. I have become a privacy expert. I've been working with cookies, cookie compliance before GDPR was in effect. Cookie information itself, it's a Danish company, and we've been around for 10 years this year. We used to be a consultancy agency. So what should European companies be aware of when collecting data on their websites? But we've over the years transitioned into a platform, a service that for now purely focus on collecting data via cookies on websites and also collecting data via software development kits in mobile apps. Again, we have our main offices here in Copenhagen, and we mainly represent companies in the Nordic region, but we do have clients all over Europe. Again, I mentioned early on that we help our clients automate the processes of informing about cookies and getting a consent to actually collect data through cookies. And these processes will also be the context for today. The overarching theme is, of course, what does it take to become compliant? I can talk for many hours about the rules, the guidelines, the regulations, the different laws, privacy legislations within the field of websites. But what we're going to focus on today is the Swedish guidelines, and I'm going to jump a bit to some assumptions that you have a general knowledge about this. Otherwise, we have much more information on our website. But the general guidelines when we talk about GDPR, e-privacy, and cookies is that for a website to collect data via cookies, you need a consent before you can collect and process non-necessary data. You need on your website to inform all of your website visitors about cookies and why you want to use them. So if you use cookies that are not necessary, you should inform about them and why. And you need to be able to document that each user on your website has consented to cookies. So those are kind of the overarching rules, guidelines for all European countries. What we're going to do now is take that as a context and then zoom into Sweden. In Sweden, there are 3 authorities, we'll get to those in a second, that are governing on this, on collecting data via websites. I've made an extensive walkthrough of each authority's guidelines, which can be found on our website. Today, I will only focus on Myndigheden for Digital Forvaltning, DIG, and their take on what is required from a Swedish company that has a website. Again, there's also Post- and Telestyrelsen and Integritetsskyddsmyndigheden, and we have an extensive webinar on this on our website. So the reason why I chose DIG as being the outline for this webinar is because they talk about cookies and they talk about consent. And that's where you want to start when on a journey to become compliant. How do you inform correctly and how do you collect consent? Where we start with DIG is that everyone, so meaning all citizens of Europe who visit a website that uses cookies, should have the information about if cookies are being used on this website and why the website wants to set these cookies. So is there being set cookies on this website and why? That's a good start. As a website owner, if you want to use cookies that are not necessary for the website, and necessary cookies could be a login cookie or in a web shop, it could be like a basket cookie that remembers what you put in the basket. There are some guidelines to what necessary cookies are, but if you want to use cookies that are non-necessary, you as the website owner need to make sure that the user consents to those cookies. Meaning it's not your web agency, it's not the person who developed your website, it is you as a company. Well, maybe some of you are not the representative of your company. Well, of course you are, but maybe not the CEO, but it's the company's responsibility to make sure that this is done correctly. Like in most cases, it's stated by DIG, you need a consent to set cookies. And we see that also all over the world. Most websites use some kind of analytical tools, Google Analytics, Pivik, other analytical tools. Most modern websites use some kind of marketing tool as Facebook Pixel or LinkedIn Pixel. Most websites use cookies that are not necessary for the website to function. DIG goes then further on and says, okay, so what is this consent? What is it you need to collect? And they say that the consent should be individual, meaning one per user. It should be freely given, meaning this has been proven in many cases That freely means you should be able to say yes and no. You cannot just say yes. That's not a free consent. That's just a consent. And that it should be specific. So the user should be able to consent to each different purpose: marketing, statistical, functionality. So there is this division of not just saying yes to cookies, but individual purposes of cookies. It is stated that you cannot collect let me see if I need to jump one, excuse me. You cannot collect a general consent. And I brought with me an example in a second. You cannot just say that this website uses cookies. That doesn't make it specific. And you can also not say, by using our website, you consent. That's not freely given. Again, I brought with me an example from a Swedish website, and we see this all over the world, all over Europe, all over, well, other regions that also have privacy legislations. That this is very much still a standard, and this is not to put anyone in a bad light, because I could go to any website, well, a lot of websites, and find this version. That we see it in the bottom of this page. This website is using cookies. Please accept. There's very little context other than by continuing to using this website, you consent, and we want to give you the best user experience. That is not full information, and it's certainly not a freely given consent. So this is one version, but the context is still that very little information is given, and I consent by just using the website. For those of you who do not read Swedish, I've translated the sort of the guidelines from DIG. I've also incorporated a little bit from my previous webinar. So if you want more context, please go watch that. But in Sweden, as almost any other country in Europe, a consent must be a freely given, specific, and informed decision by the user. There's also that very, very tough word for us Scandinavians, unambiguous, which means the user should not be in doubt whether they have given consent or not. It shouldn't be some weird black box that, oh, all of a sudden you've given a consent. It needs to be apparent and transparent that you've given a consent. You should actually also be able to withdraw your consent or change your consent at a later stage. All right. You cannot process, as a website owner, as a company that owns a website, personal data before you have this consent. And saying no to cookies should be as easy as saying yes. Then we have some determinations from other regions of Europe. In Germany, a case was done with a company that had one way of collecting consent, and of that came that you cannot pre-tick decisions for the end user. We'll get into what that means in a couple of minutes. It just means that the user needs to actively say yes to cookies, not actively say no to cookies. For some, that makes sense. For others, that is new information. Then we have one thing that I find very hard for individual companies in Europe, which is the company needs to collect and store the consent for documentation. And this needs to be done, well, first and foremost, if the end user who visited the website said, what did I consent to on your website? You need to be able to show them what they consented to and what then happened. But we've also seen when the data protection authorities audit companies in regards to GDPR consent collection, that you need to be able to document that you have collected consents from all of your website visitors. So there needs to be a kind of documentation log. let's see if I can connect one of the questions, even though please use the Q&A section for questions, but I can see a question was, what about strictly necessary cookies? If you choose decline all, are strictly necessary cookies declined? And this becomes sort of technical meets non-technical. Strictly necessary cookies make the website work. So you cannot decline those. That can be from the website builder in order to show the website it uses cookies. So no, you cannot decline necessary cookies. But then it's also the company's responsibility not to set cookies that collect and process personal data as a necessary cookie. But strictly necessary cookies that only make the website work, yes, those should always be active. Otherwise, you cannot show the website. So how does this work in practice? This is one example. It's a pop-up that we have created, and it's actually the one we recommend all of our clients all over Europe. And what we find here is a general text. It's a easily understandable text that says you have a choice and you're about to make a choice with cookies, and we use cookies for different purposes: functionality, statistical purposes, marketing purposes. And by clicking the different buttons underneath, different things will happen. There's a link to a cookie policy, which goes more in depth, because of course you don't need 3 pages of text before the user can use the website. You can save that a bit in the background, but the user needs to be fully, or at least have the ability to be fully informed before they give their consent. What we found over the last couple of years is that there is a best practice that a cookie pop-up should be able to have functionality to give the end user more information. So what we've done in our pop-up, and what we recommend everyone doing, is having some kind of detail toggle. So that's the one underneath the 2 buttons. I'll just click that one. And what it does is, well, I doubt that many website visitors even go here, but what it does is it allows the end user to be able to see exactly what cookies are set on this specific website. Why the website wants to set them. There's even a link to, if it's a third party, here we have a YouTube example, there's even a link to that third party's privacy policy. So what do they do with the data that they receive? And there's also an expiration date, in this case, when the session is over. So once the user leaves the website. So there's a lot of information in this. Again, I doubt that the average user on a website is even interested in reading this, but it needs to be documented. It can look in many different ways. So I've taken a couple of examples. This is one way of doing it. There's a bit more information apparent. There's even more buttons. There's a accept all cookies, decline all except for necessary cookies, and a consent to whatever I have toggled in the toggles above. And again, here it becomes a bit clearer that the user should not click multiple toggles in order to say no to cookies. They should actually, the opposite, toggle things on and then say yes. There can, of course, be a yes to all cookies button. We have one where there's a bit less functionality upfront, but if you click show details, you have the full overview and the full transparent choice one more click away. It actually has a little text that says no to all. Then we have the recommendation from us, our standard recommendation in a context. Somebody who has included their logo and their visual identity. So there's a reason why most of you are listening to me right now. It's the law, but I want to also give some kind of context to why is this important for a company. Again, I can go through different fines all over Europe and why companies have been given fines in regards to cookies. Most fines we have seen so far is that companies, well, websites have automatically placed cookies that are not necessary, even though the user has not consented. The two latest examples I have are from France, but we are seeing this all over Europe. We actually just saw it a couple of days ago in north of Germany. So this is the easiest sort of mistake. It's also the most technical part, is how do you tell your website not to set any cookies before the user has clicked the button? It's not something you can do by just telling someone to do it. It actually needs an implementation. But what I want to say is, I've taken an example from Denmark, and this is our the regional or sort of the national weather institute. Sorry if that's the wrong translation, but that's not important here. A couple of years ago, they were, and we actually helped them through that. They were one of the first cases in Denmark where the authorities went through their cookie setup and then made the new guidelines that we have in Denmark based on this. And if I Google that now, most online, there's a lot of online PR information that relates to that case. So I think, yes, the Danish Weather Institute will probably survive that. A lot of law firms, both nationally and internationally, have now written about this online. But how will that serve for a small brand if they are suddenly a part of a media storm that they cannot control? So what I'm trying to say is, there are tools to do this correctly. And we are seeing, because it's not that many companies in the Nordics that have been through an audit and not gone through. If you don't, a lot of lawyers will comment on it online. There's another reason for having privacy in mind and doing this correctly. A study was done by McKinsey, where they say that, and it was, of course, is the sample size representative? Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But McKinsey made a study that said that 71% of the people they questioned would stop doing business with a company if they gave away sensitive data without permission. And the context is here was that if the users that they questioned felt that if they found out that a company was doing something illegally with their data, they would not deal with them again. So there is a lot at risk here from a company perspective, a brand value perspective. Where does one then start? So we have the context of what needs to be done in Sweden, collect a consent on a fully informed basis. It should be as easy to say yes as to say no. We should have, as a user, access to each individual purpose of the cookies that are being set. And we should be able to say yes and no to the different purposes. There's a brand value to this. But where do you then start? If we connect this back to the GDPR general guidelines in all of Europe, we need a consent before you can process data from each user. You need to inform about each individual cookie and why you want to set them and what data you want to collect with them and for how long you store that data. And then you need to document each consent. I mentioned it earlier, and this is why I recommend, and of course I do, but this is why I recommend every company to find a service that can help you with this. It can be us, it can be anyone, but the most technical part of this, and the fines we saw in France and Germany, is not respecting the consent, meaning before the user clicks accept, nothing but necessary cookies should be running on the website. I saw a question from Andrea that said, is it possible to have no cookies at all? Yes, it is. And then you don't need a consent. But I think I've only spoken to a handful of companies, whoever contacted us, that didn't use cookies. It's very rare that a website in 2021 does not use cookies if they run any kind of online marketing or spend any kind of money on their online presence. But if you don't, then fair enough. And it is definitely possible. Then you don't need a consent. But before the user clicks accept or define their consent, no scripts, becomes a bit technical, no scripts that set cookies should be running. Google Analytics, Facebook Pixel, heat mapping with Hotjar, whatever scripts that are objectively not necessary should not be running. Again, this is a technical thing. So yeah, how do I say this? Please include your web agency, include your IT department, activate the needed resources, because this is easier said than done. Hence, we are seeing this is where companies are getting fines. It's again a technical thing, but companies like ours and our competitors / colleagues in the field of this, we have made, of course, easier ways, more best practices in doing this. If you do not, maybe going back to do we use cookies or not, if you are aware, if you are unaware if you even use cookies, on our website you can get a free compliance check. One of my colleagues, Emma, will go through the website and see, does it set cookies? Do you collect a consent correctly? Do you inform correctly about cookies? And we'll send a compliance check back to you. So please use, I believe it's in the footer of our website, cookieinformation.com. Scroll to the bottom. There's a test you can take. But other than the technical aspect of this, collecting a consent before the cookies are set, one thing that we and our colleagues in this industry, we are called a CMP, a consent management platform. So what does this platform do? So one thing that we automate is that we scan our clients' websites at a frequency. At the moment, we scan most of our clients' websites once a week. And what we do is we automate the process of knowing what cookies are on this website. So a scan goes through, crawls the whole website, and then collects all cookies that are set and then match them to a database that returns to our clients which cookies are being set, for how long do they store data, why, what purpose does this cookie have, and if it shares data with any third parties, Google, Facebook, whatever, which does it share data with, and a link to their privacy policy. So I think when GDPR was put in effect, many companies made a review of their website. Okay, which cookies do we use? They did that. They put it online on their website under a link called cookie policy, and then they never looked at it again. But websites don't work like that. At least modern websites don't work like that. Companies initiate new marketing efforts. They want to have more analytics on their I don't know, their blog posts. They go from one video host to another. It can be quite the effort to make sure that the information on your website is correct. So this is one way to automate that process. Find a tool, test out our tool, and have a scan of your website. I've taken an example. This is a company that uses our software. They have incorporated on the right-hand side this automatic scan that is then automatically updated. So they don't need to initiate anything if they use a new tool or get a new cookie. Actually, YouTube a couple of months ago, the video player that everyone uses suddenly started setting 2 cookies instead of 1. So our scanner found out, but I doubt that normal companies would realize this. So it's not only companies initiating new tools or new tracking technologies on their website, it's actually also the existing tools that develop over time and set new cookies. I will jump, time is running, into, so where are we now in 2021? Because I talk a lot about holding back cookies before the user has consented, that the user should be able to say no to cookies, and that no analytics, or at least no non-necessary cookies should run if the user says no to cookies if they don't consent. So what kind of impact does that have on a business? Because if we cannot measure the user journey of our visitors, and we cannot measure if they clicked a Facebook campaign, if they don't consent, well, then we're losing out on data. And yes, that is the core premise of GDPR and e-privacy. The user should be able to say no to give you data, give us data, give anyone data. They should, and we should respect that as companies in the European Union. So what I would like to include you in is, what should you expect? Because by being compliant, does that then mean that we will only get 10% of the data that we're used to, or 50%, or how many actually say yes on our website? How many consent? And what I've brought with me today is an analysis of our standard recommendation for all of our clients. We've analyzed on 300 websites in all of Europe. So there's social aspects to this that are not taken into account, and regional aspects to this, but the common denominator is that it's websites in Europe that has this kind of pop-up. So the full functionality and the full information. And what we found, the latest study we have was made just after the summer holidays. What we found that approximately 73.8% in average accept all cookies. So across all industries, across all countries, but with the same kind of pop-up, in average, this sample size of 3,000 websites saw that 73.8% clicked accept all. In this study, we have municipality websites, so and other public sector websites, and they have a very high consent rates. The users who go to their municipality website will most likely trust the municipality that they live in and say yes to cookies. And we also have web shops that sells sex toys, and they are in the other end of the spectrum. Or at least that's my assumption. So this is an average, and it really depends on the brand and what kind of website you have. One thing we can see is that it affects the consent rates if the user can decode that they are on the right website. Therefore, we recommend everyone to, if you do ask for a consent correctly, include your logo, include your visual identity, make sure that the user know that they are on the right website. Otherwise, there's a big chance that they might leave. One thing we also found in this study was that those of our clients that have red in their visual identity and then use that as their consent button or accept button, we actually found that they had a lower consent. So just a kind of observation that is maybe not recommended if your aim is to collect consents correctly, but get as many consents as possible. Another interesting find was that the two buttons, so the overall decline all and the overall accept all, if there was a big difference in the length of the texts, the users most often clicked the button with the short text. So we recommend having equal text lengths on the different buttons. Of course, there are companies that are user experience experts and consultants and live off this. And I'm sure they would say, well, that's common knowledge. And my conclusion is then the pop-up on a website for cookies and consents follow normal web standards. If and when you follow the guidelines, you collect consents, you fully inform your users, you make sure that whatever they consent to, only what they consent to is fired, and therefore you only collect data for those purposes. How do you carry this on into the future? Because as I mentioned, okay, a couple of years ago, companies would make a list of what cookies they have and then never visit it again. But the world has changed. Privacy is very much in focus, both from users, from clients, from members of websites, and it needs that attention. And I've taken with me a scenario that some of you can relate to, and then some of you maybe can't, but it is what happens in companies. We have a world where more and more companies are fighting for online presence. More and more companies are being data driven. Much of this, even with COVID, much of this data is being fed to the company via their websites. So we have this need for companies to get more data. Then we have, well, that kind of puts pressure on marketing or IT departments or other departments that run the digitalization of the company. So we have these departments that are being measured on initiatives online. And then we have development, web agencies, marketing agencies, other IT related tasks that needs to be done on a website. That could be making the website run more smoothly, or making it more easy for the users of your website to log in or buy stuff. And many of these optimizations are being done via third-party software. Most companies don't develop their own solutions anymore. When we here in Cookie Information talk to our clients, when they come to us, we kind of say, okay, you have this project where you want to correctly inform and make sure you do it correctly. When you initiate, or when you want to get more data or do analytics in a new way, or stuff like that, I think it needs to be verbalized. Is this data necessary, or is it just nice to have? Because collecting the data most likely needs a consent. So do we need this data? If yes, how do we want to collect this data? Is the website the best way to do it, or do we want to do it via a newsletter? Is there any other way we can collect the data than cookies? If we decide that yes, cookies is the way to collect this data, can the data collection be seen as objectively necessary? So do you even need a consent? For example, as I mentioned earlier, if all you want to do is, of course, this is not 100% foolproof or bulletproof, but if you just want to remember if a user puts something into a shopping basket for the next time that user arrives, you can probably do that without knowing anything about the user except for their basket. So maybe that could be considered necessary, and therefore you don't need a consent. But many functionalities do need a consent. All right. The data that we collect, do we share it with other companies? So having a YouTube video, do we share data with YouTube? Yes, most likely. All right. How do we inform about that? Because that then leads to, do we want to use this third-party software, or should we develop something ourselves? If it's a video host, maybe you don't want to develop your own video host, but maybe you can host the video in your CMS system or in your website where you don't need to share data. And then again, going back to how do we collect this data? Once you've made that analysis, are there any other ways of collecting this data? I think this is a way to go about it, other than just pushing new software and new systems and new functionality on your website. Please do make an assessment. Do you collect data? With who do you share data? And is this the right way for you to perform what you want to perform via cookies? The conclusion to that is, a couple of years ago when we started talking to companies, well, 4 years ago, when we started talking to companies about cookies, consents, and all of this, most of it landed either with IT or marketing. And what needs to happen, if it hasn't already happened in your company, is this is a overarching task in all of the company. The fines are big, the brand value is at stake, the need and wish to be more data driven needs to be aligned across the company. So it's important for the C-level to understand the risk by getting more data. It's important for marketing or whoever is in charge of what goes live on the website to select the right method if data is being collected, if they want to collect data. And it's also very important that the IT department or the web agency or whoever implements on the website are enabled and have the right tool and the right time to make sure that it's implemented the correct way, that a consent is collected, because you don't want to rush implementation and then have to revisit it later. So this is the world we live in. That was a lot. Again, the webinar will be recorded and sent to all of you. Now I will see, and this is always tricky because now I have to click some buttons here, if there are any questions. With that said, most of you should have received my contact information. If you have any questions specific to your website, to your setup, something that you heard or something, one of your colleagues have this question and you don't know, please reach out to me. I would be more than happy to guide you in any directions in regards to cookies, consents, and general privacy in regards to Swedish companies. I will just see, oh, I've got one question. So this is always a bit of a toughie because I can read out the question, and if I can't answer it off the top of my head, it becomes awkward. So I will just quickly read the question here. All right, okay. I think I addressed that a bit earlier. Is it possible to use no cookies at all? And what do you miss by doing that? So I believe I made a webinar that's online on our website earlier about cookies, because websites, in order for a computer to give data to the website owner, the most common way is cookies. There's also other technologies, server-side information sending, other scripts that initiate data sharing, but cookies have been the most common way of doing that for the last 20 years. What it does is it allows this computer to send data again to the website owner via the website, most often to a third-party software. Google Analytics, the way you get analytical data based on user behavior is most often via cookies. So can you run a website without cookies? Yes, but you miss everything. You can't get any data unless you do it in other ways of cookies. And that's also becoming very modern. Remember, consents are still valid. You still need consent. What are the most common purposes of necessary cookies? Well, the purpose is necessary. The most common are login cookies, language change cookies. So if a website needs to be in, I don't know, Swedish or English, most websites set a cookie to remember when that user arrives to show the website in the preferred language. H&M has that feature. If you go to H&M.com or whatever their main website is, you choose what language you're from, and then next time you're redirected. That would be a necessary cookie. Are different colors on the buttons compliant? And then there's a reference to a case that we just saw in Denmark. Yes, different colors are compliant. We actually, we asked the Danish authority, Datatilsynet, about this. So what can we use different colors in the yes or no button? And they, in their own guidelines, they use red and blue. So we asked if we could use green and gray, and they commented that they replied that they could not comment on which colors to use, but different colors can be used. But what we just saw not that many months ago in Denmark was that a company was heavily criticized by the Danish authorities by having a button that was the background color of the button was the same color as the background color of the pop-up, which meant in theory the button didn't have a color. So it was white and the background was white. So technically it was a button, but the user could not see the button. That is not okay. It needs to be a color that stands out from the background. Very interesting from Magnus. Can I claim that YouTube is necessary if it's needed to show content? This is a very, very good question. I am not one to say if YouTube and showing content can be considered necessary or not. But what I hear from our clients is that some companies do make the assessment that for their company, they have set YouTube as necessary. YouTube video players does share data with YouTube. Playtime, what is this computer interested in on YouTube? So I recommend most companies to assess if they can find other video players than YouTube. YouTube is a great video player and it offers a lot of benefits, but I would say most companies need a consent to set a YouTube video. Some companies assess otherwise, but that's their own risk assessment. Then there is a very sort of marketing heavy question, which is Google consent mode compliant? We have more information about what Google consent mode is on our website, and if sort of what thoughts you should make as a company if that's compliant or not for you. So I refer to our website in regards to Google consent mode. Okay, everyone is using the chat functionality now. So for the record, the webinar is almost over. So if you want to hear these questions, you're more than welcome to stay. Otherwise, I will record the answers to the questions that I can know the questions that I know the answers for, and it will be sent afterwards. So I will just take the next 9 minutes to answer questions. For those of you who don't want to stick around for those questions, thank you very much for joining. Please reach out to me if you have any specific questions to your specific situation. Otherwise, again, thank you very much for joining. All right. Let's see here. Back to the questions from Magnus again. Is it possible to set up Google Analytics so I can use it legally? Magnus, you must come from or represent a marketing division in a company. These are some of the topics that are being heavily discussed in all of Europe right now. Google Analytics has that overarching problem that it almost always looks at the user's IP address and it almost always shares data with Google. So I think you should, if you have a marketing agency connected to your company, do consult what they recommend you to do. Here in Cookie Information, we are still awaiting. We are talking to the Danish data protection authorities. When can statistics be What does it mean when it's anonymized? Can statistics be collected via Google Analytics without a consent? I think it's a debate that's highly hot, very hot right now, and I do not have a clear answer for you. But I have seen very few that have successfully implemented Google Analytics without looking at the IP address and without sharing personal data with Google by using analytics. But I've seen some do it in a way that looks compliant. But I think we need a authority, either the Swedish, Danish, Norwegian, German, whatever, or some very, very knowledgeable lawyers to say that it can be done. About the UX. So from Ellen, about the UX design of cookie consent. I have read that you have to have 2 button options, customize and accept all. That will result in higher levels on cookie consents. Due to that, is one more step to reject all. Is that illegal? Okay, I think I understand the question, that these cookie pop-ups, some of them have a very easy yes/no choice, and some of them have a yes to all and customized choice. Yes, the ones who have one more click for the user to say no have higher consent rates. Is it legal? We recommend all of our clients to have the apparent choice up front, yes, no, on the front page. Some of our clients and some companies in the world assess otherwise, because what does it mean that it needs to be as easy to say yes to cookies as saying no to cookies? The more fines, the more guidelines, the more focus on this from the authorities, from lawyers, from companies like us and you, the more knowledgeable we will be. We have not seen a clear decision from any authority on this, but I will say we are leaning and we are recommending everyone to have the yes no button up front for everyone. Do you have any insights into Google Flock? I sadly do not. Google Flock is, for those of you who don't know what it is, well, I almost don't. It's Google's way of trying to, based on anonymized data, do the future of analytics. And I'm not the right one to answer that because it's very much in a testing phase. So please go to Google's website to learn more about Flock, F-L-O-C. It's very few of our clients that are even venturing down that road yet. So we are not met with many questions in regards to Flock yet. But let's also see if it becomes the future. Maybe it dies out. Google tries stuff. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. Magnus is back saying, can you show what way that looks compliant? You know what, Magnus, reach out to me on email and let's have an online meeting and we can go into more in depth, because you are clearly an expert in this marketing. So let's look at examples together. Yeah, perfect. It seems that there are not that many more questions. It was also, Robert raised his hand. So again, Vitalina are moderating the questions. I will look at all the questions that were not a part of this. No more questions, okay. That were not a part of this. If there were any, I'll get back to you individually. Thank you very much for joining. I hope this was informative. If I can get you to give a little bit of feedback on this webinar, it would be super welcome. I hope it was informative. I know there was a lot. But feel free to write me an email, just a quick one about pros and cons. And other than that, have a great day and take care. Bye-bye. Oh, I can see just on the nick of time, there was a question about the strictly necessary cookies. Whoever asked that question, I'll try to get, otherwise write me an email or I'll reach out to you and we can have a chat about strictly necessary cookies. I will just thank you very much for today.